My name is Russell Medley, and this is my EDL 850 case study. In this case study, we look at St. Regis School, which is a rural school located about 25 minutes from a big city. It serves K through 8 students, and the school has two main fundraisers in helping meet instructional goals and needs that are organized by the PTA. These needs are material needs for teachers, as well as computer and new software. Mr. Keith Sample is the principal at St. Regis School and has been there for the past 3 years. He works hard to create positive relationships with resistant teachers and longtime residents who don't accept change easily. A recent survey found that he had gained a lot of supporters and wants to maintain this status. The fundraising efforts were able to utilize a computer lab that housed 20 computers. New software was prioritized and purchased based on teacher feedback. This was led by Mrs. Lynn, who is the library media specialist, and Mr. Sample. Mrs. Lynn purchased software, cataloged and stored the software, and also created a schedule for teachers to use the computer lab and software. Later, teachers approached Mrs. Lynn about using software on a broader scale. They would like the software to be in individual individual computers in the classrooms, and Mrs. Lynn copied software on flash drives and distributed it to the classrooms. One of those teachers was Mrs. Brandon, who was not comfortable with the use of the copying of software. She knew of copyright issues at her previous school, and she expressed concern with Mrs. Lynn about this. Mrs. Lynn did not seem concerned and thought that they were stretching the PTA money to help meet student needs. Later, Mrs. Brandon went to Mr. Sample with her concerns. Mr. Sample approaches Mrs. Lynn and reminds her about copyright laws, informs that she needs to stop copying and collect what has already been copied. Mrs. Lynn is still not concerned. She feels that no one will care about a few copies in their small school. And then the PTA president, Mrs. Evans, is also very pleased with how they are stretching the dollars to help all students and teachers. So looking at some legal and ethical issues, first and foremost on the legal side are just copyright restrictions found in the 1976 U.S. Copyrights Act and 1980 amendments. Making copies of purchased software infringes on software company policies, and legal action could ensue if the software company knew about copies being made. There's also that of the PTA and the teachers disregarding copyright laws, even after being reminded or made aware of. They kind of just still to choose to look the other way. And this may be because there's a lack of training on copyright laws, or, like what was mentioned earlier, they just feel that they're such a small school that no one's going to really be paying attention. And so they feel like they're just maximizing the money that they get from their PTA. Also, Mr. Sample's goal of keeping positive relationships with teachers and other stakeholders is kind of at risk here. It's another little ethical dilemma that he has to deal with. This may get hurt if he puts a stop to the copying of computer software. There seems to be a lot of teachers that want this to happen, and so that could hurt his relationships there. Also, the PTA money is involved, and it may upset them as well. So when we synthesize what is happening, the teachers and staff are just trying to meet the needs of teachers and students by making copies of purchased software, but are also not following copyright laws in doing so. So then next we look at the facts. We know, as far as the people go, Mr. Sample, who's been there for the past 3 years, he's not originally from St. Regis, and his goal is to build positive relationships with teachers and stakeholders. The PTA puts on fundraisers to help meet financial needs of the school. Their goal is to purchase new software and computers. The president, Mrs. Evans, is pleased with the copying of software and stretching PTA dollars. Mrs. Lynn is the library media specialist. She schedules the computer lab time for teachers. She helped in purchasing new software, and she was the one who made copies of the software for individual teachers to use in their classrooms. We also know Mrs. Brandon, who has 3 years experience at another school. She is not comfortable with the copying of the software, and she understands the legal aspects of doing so. We look at the places next. So we have our St. Regis School, 25 minutes from the city. It serves K through 8 students. The school has about 420 students, and after they get done in 8th grade, they travel to the city for high school. The computer lab holds 20 computers. Teachers have scheduled times when they can use the lab. And then as far as the program, we know that there's purchased software, and this was selected based on feedback from teachers and then prioritized by the media specialist and the principal. And we also know of fundraising programs. There was 2 mentioned every year that help with material needs as well as computer software initiative. Some of the things that we are not that are not known as far as people go is there's no mention of anyone higher up than the principal, Mr. Sample. So no mention of the superintendent, We don't hear anything about the Board of Education involvement. The years of experience of not only Mrs. Lynn, but some of the other teachers in the building, and then other members of the PTA and their knowledge of the copyright issues. Mrs. Evans was the only one mentioned, so we're not sure how many people are on the PTA and their knowledge of copyright laws. Things that were not known as far as place goes is just the makeup of the community in terms of race, socioeconomic status, etc. And then what high school kids are going to after eighth grade. Is this a governing district? Is there a governing district that serves both this K through 8 building as well as the high school? And then what is that involvement between the high school and K through 8 school? And then as far as programs that are unknown is just any board policy on copyright laws, any training or staff development on laws and responsibilities, and then any contract or acceptable use agreements between the software company and the school. Next, we review and prioritize the impact on stakeholders. With Mr. Sample, this decision could impact his job as well as financial consequences for his school. It also could create a rift between teachers, PTA, and himself. Mrs. Lynn could be held responsible for making the copies of software. She could ultimately lose her job as well. Mrs. Brandon could create tension and distrust between herself and other staff and admin if they turn a blind eye to copyright issues, especially with her going forward and mentioning and reminding them of copyright laws. And then it's just kind of an ethical dilemma of what to do. Does she want to stay on board and know that her school is doing something illegal, or does she feel like she can't trust these people and maybe leave her school? Other administration, there's no mention of any school board or superintendent, or if they had been contacted on the issue at hand. And I think more information is needed as far as policies, training, and et cetera to copyright. So then we look at our options and consequences. First and foremost, we could do nothing as the principal. The software company could be made aware of copying and take legal action. And then also this might create distrust in those who are not comfortable with copying the software. Another option would be to contact the software company, and this might raise a red flag with them when they will definitely try and keep tabs on us using their software. They may pursue legal action if made aware of the copies. There also could be a punishment for Mrs. Lynn for making copies, but this might create tension in the workplace, and then also may reflect poorly on myself for not properly training or supervising those who are under me. Another option would be to get rid of the copies and just discontinue copying of the software. This would make it harder for teachers to utilize the software and meet instructional goals, and then it puts more of a financial burden back on the PTA in continuing trying to fund the software and computer needs. So when evaluating my options, first with doing nothing, some pros would be that students and teachers will have greater access to software and helping with the instructional goals. The PTA money will be maximized and able to save money to use elsewhere. The cons is that legal action could come if caught, and then there would be some distrust among staff who are not comfortable with the copies. The second option would be to contact the software company. Some pros would be that there may be options for copying the software within legal limits, and then informing them of the copying, but that the school is taking steps to rectify would maybe help in avoiding legal trouble and kind of just building some trust between us and them. Some cons would be that the software company may see the school as a red flag and keep tabs on the use of software, and then ultimately they could also pursue legal action. Another option would be punishing Mrs. Lynn, and this might be a formal write-up, a change in her responsibilities, or a firing. Some pros would be that this just sets clear expectations on behavior that is tolerated and behavior that is not tolerated. Some cons would be that it would create rift among school staff, and this would go against my goal of creating positive relationships with staff. This also might, punishing her, be seen as a cover for any fault that I might have in this case study. Another option would be to get rid of the copies and prevent future copying from happening. Some pros would be that this would be compliance with copyright laws. It would also model appropriate behavior among staff and just help in building a positive school culture. Some cons would be that it would make it harder for teachers and students to utilize the software, and this may also upset our teachers or PTA because it's not really maximizing the spending. So the option that I chose is kind of a hybrid choice. First and foremost, I would think that the software company should be contacted and just make them aware that an incident occurred in which copies were made, see what is allowed and not allowed in regard to copies, and then seeing if there are options for getting duplicate copies. Maybe if we want to get extra copies, there might be a reduction in price in getting those. But I think it's important to keep them in the loop of what's happening. Just kind of building that relationship that, hey, this happened, but we're taking steps to make it right. And then assuming the copies of the material were not allowed from the software company, we would collect all copies of the software and destroy copies, and then prevent copying from happening in the future. So implementing this decision, first and foremost, it would be important is just to inform Mrs. Lynn, the PTA, and all of the other staff about the legalities of copyright material. Um, Unlawful use of copyright material will not be tolerated. I could also talk about the potential consequences we could face as a school, and then refer to a board policy if one is in place. There was not one mentioned, but that would be important as well. Next would be to collect all copies of the software, and then contact the software company, determine an acceptable use of the software. Are copies allowed? If so, how many? If we have to pay for copies, what's the cost there? If copies are not allowed, then inform them that copies were made but were quickly collected when I was made aware of the situation. Apologize for and ensure steps will be taken to make sure this does not happen again. And then how would they like those copies to be destroyed? Next would be to follow the software company guidelines in handling of the copyright material. Then I would work with the board, the superintendent on policies and handling copyright material. This would include board policies. This would also be yearly training for our staff and PTAs and anyone else that might have access to our schools and our finances and things like that. And then also it's important just to have like poster reminders in the computer lab, copy machines, etc. Just reminding people of their responsibilities with copyright material. And then finally, I think it's important to work with the PTA and other stakeholders in ways that we can continue to support them in fundraising efforts to just try and still have those strong relationships. Just making sure that our PTA knows that they are appreciated, and then continue to create goals and timelines for implementation. Thank you very much.